Thank you so much. Good morning, Greece.
Dear Mr. Benefeld, good morning from Greece. Thank you for addressing
Thank you for having me.
the Digital Economy Forum 2022. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Greece. Good morning, Athens. I'm sorry that I could not be there in person, but I should imagine the days before Christmas are extremely busy. I know this conference, I've participated many times, and it's very valuable for the dialogue on digital in Greece. And a big thank you to SEPEgr for inviting me to join you and to give you a little bit of insight in what is going on in Brussels and in Europe. We are a trade organization that represents around 45,000 digital companies in Europe. We have membership organizations in 35 European countries and a corporate chamber of around 100 multinationals. So what do we do? I mean, we are the representatives of private sector towards the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, but also really working closely together with SEPEgr and our other national associations in promoting digital and making sure that the regulations that we have for digital are tailored to make us more competitive, more inclusive, and have a better European market. I'll get back to that. So let us look at the slides. I think we can skip the first few of them because I already told you who we are. Please go to the next slide. Yeah, so as you see here, we work on hardware, software, but we also have all the sectors. We have finance, healthcare, buildings, mobility. Why? Well, as you most likely know, all of you, the economy is changing, and all the digital regulations are not only for digital companies, they are definitely also for the digitalizing industries. And of course, it is the main driver of sustainability, it's the main driver on competitiveness, and we really need to get that right here in Europe. Let's jump to the next slide, please. Well, our President Ursula von der Leyen, I think we can say that she's maybe one of the most visionary presidents of the Commission that we ever had. She's also a president that has gone through two major crises, first COVID, and then, of course, the terrible war in Ukraine. And been able to navigate those waters is not easy. A lot of different interests in Europe, but two things she has really taken as main targets of this Commission. One, we need the greening of the economy. Two, we need to become more digital. And three, she is connecting the two, saying we cannot become greener if we are not becoming more digital. And I mean, you can say she got the most serious showcases in the world. First of all, the first crisis showing how closely linked digital and health is, both with the vaccine, the COVID passport, but also with the finding of the vaccines. The vaccines would never have been found that quickly if we had not had the health data and the ability to use health data and AI on healthcare. The second one, showing our energy crisis. Well, had we been thinking about how to use AI, IoT, digital twins in buildings, or to bring down the energy consumption in general, we would not have found ourselves in this terrible situation, very dependent on Russian fuel, and in the situations where the industry and everybody suffers from the fact that we have not changed to more green energy. So you can say her business cases were very clear. However, the devil is in the detail, and of course now the results are still to be seen. She has published the RRF, so 750 billion for spending on this green and digital transformation, and she dedicated 150 billion towards digital. Each member state had to come up with a plan on how to transform themselves, and she even dedicated more, nearly double, to the green transition. Now, of course, the idea is really to combine the two and see how we can both make the economy more green and more digital. And here, as she said, Another angle is, of course, cybersecurity and the struggle between democracy and autocracy. The digital sphere is not a slideshow, it's the front line. We have definitely seen this in our Ukrainian activity, and I will get back to how serious this have actually been and what the consequences of not having enough supply or a safe infrastructure can actually be. Let us jump to the next slide, please. So big picture here, cyber crimes. Well, we lack around 200,000 cyber specialists. And that doesn't really mean like, how can you say me and you and everybody around here who should know more about how to protect themselves and run their companies with cybersecurity. Here we are only talking really cybersecurity specialists that can defend us. We predict that it will rise until to around 1.5 million specialists, lack of 1.5 million specialists by 2030. This is a serious problem. We have educational systems that are simply not teaching our young generations the skills that are needed to navigate in a digital world. And we are playing hazard with our security due to that. There's a lot of other figures here. Cybercrime is 1.5 trillion problem. And it really hits our GDP even harder. If you see it, look at this, EU spending is only 2% of GDP on research and development. It is below any of the continent and partners that we would like to be similar to or have the same level as. Well, and one other thing, when we have a cyber attack, who do you call? Maybe you will try to call your cybersecurity agency in your country. Some of them might respond and help you. Some of them will respond that unfortunately they don't have collaboration with private sector. So unfortunately they can't do anything. In the meanwhile, minutes of importance, we have the cyber attack spreading across borders. It is a fact that cyber criminals and cyber crimes, they don't give a damn whether you are in private sector or public sector, and they don't give a damn whether you are in Greece, Sweden, or Denmark, or Norway, or somewhere else. So how do we actually discuss in council, in the EU, with our prime ministers, because this is security policy, how can we basically make a much more secure governance structure for cyber defense? And how can we make sure that we do not try to protect ourselves and saying this is a national remit, this is a national competence, but really make the best team out of it in Europe to defend ourselves. And this is actually this year on the 9th of November, EU, so the Council asked the Commission to come out with a cyber defense policy. So the very first of the kind, talking about private-public partnership, talking about a chain of command in cyber defense in Europe has just come out. It's a major step in history, and it certainly is a very necessary one because we cannot limit ourselves to a team within the country. We do need a team that works across border. Let me jump to the next slide. So these are, of course, some of the big pictures that are happening, and I would say the wake-up call, the terrible wake-up call was, of course, the war in Ukraine. Private sector played a vital role. Who has the best competences within cyber? Who invented the cybersecurity tools that can help us to prevent it and to sort out the mess once we are under attack? Private sector. If we look at the Ukrainian war, two things interplayed here. One, first of all, a lot of their data was already moved into the cloud. So it was possible to move their data out immediately. Why? Because they were under attack in 2014 and they were prepared. They had a contingency plan. We have seen other countries like Estonia with their cyber embassies around in other EU countries. Well, so the cloud solutions definitely help them. Another one is that many of the cyber attacks was basically detected in the cloud by companies like Microsoft and others who could see, oh my God, something is happening. There is a changing environment. There's a lot of attacks. What's going on? And they predicted basically that there was troop movements from the Russians. So we need to be much more connected with our, of course, players in the market, companies like Asset, a Slovenian company, really, really strong in cybersecurity, growing immensely across border in Europe. Lockpoint, many other, we have many, many great companies, also members of Digital Europe that are focused on cybersecurity. And you know what? They have one agenda, and it's exactly the same as public sector, to keep us safe. So Ukraine definitely has shown new agile models of private-public partnership, especially in two things. So cybersecurity, and in the other one was infrastructure. The Ukrainian government called us, I think it was 2 days after the war broke out, and asked us, can you help us with infrastructure? The Russians are moving in. They are destroying our radios. We cannot communicate. We cannot lead our troops in the right direction. Help us. And immediately we helped them. We hooked up with several players, several countries, and shipped in infrastructure components. Second of all, we managed to highlight this to the Commission, who changed the emergency mechanism, and now actually digital infrastructure components are defined as a part of the emergency mechanisms and the funding that can be used to help countries that are suffering. Last but not least, let me just highlight one thing, and I hope that Greece will be a very good partner in this and find a hub. We have just launched a big PC collection point. So what we are looking for is the 300,000 PCs. Children cannot go to school, hospital cannot connect, people, teachers, there's a big lack of devices. So if you have old devices, we will make sure that they are cleaned. All you need to have a device, either an iPhone, an iPad, a PC, which has a workable charger. And even though it's a little bit old, it's okay. We will basically cleanse them and gather them with the Commission around in the member states and ship them to Ukraine via Slovenia. So please do help us to collect PCs, and I hope that SEPEgr will be our collecting point, because right now is winter. It's where everybody kind of is a little bit worn out by the war, but they are still in the middle of it. And as the ICT sector, we will not give up on them. We want to see Ukraine, as they are part of Digital Europe, also a part of Europe. Next slide, please. So what we have seen here, of course, is a need for a more structured cyber defense. And what you see here is our recommendations. We've been meeting with state secretaries, ministers, high-level people from NATO, and basically been discussing with them, how should we structure this? So a new cyber defense structure that is structured in the EU with concrete chain of command if it goes wrong. A stronger EU-NATO collaboration on vulnerability sharing, specific KPIs on training for cybersecurity professionals, so we make sure that we have the number of specialists that we need. I think that Blinken, I had a meeting with Blinken and State Secretary Blinken on the Biden, and he said, well, okay, so what you're saying is that the one that has the specialists of the future are the winning nations. I said, of course, it has always been like that. But somehow digital has been for nerds too long. Digital is the only language that we speak all over the world, which connects up us all, unfortunately also the criminals. So let's make sure that we have the specialists that we need. Second of all, rise 3% of the GDP spendings on defense. We cannot keep on going with 2%. We have a whole new universe of cyber that we need to protect and many new technologies that we need to develop. So we should go from 2 to 3% spendings on the defense. A more structured private-public dialogue, much more structured and formal, and EU legislation that supports cybersecurity, for example, the AI Act, but of course also the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act. And last but not least, use of international forums like the TTC, the Trade and Technology Council between EU and US, to agree on common standards for cybersecurity, for artificial intelligence, and for quantum computing and many other technologies. We need to basically do a lot of work with the friends and allies that we have around the world. Let's flip to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. Okay, let me jump to another big subject, which is, of course, the greening of the economy. Well, we see that digital technologies basically have a huge potential, and it has a potential of letting resource-intensive industries save more than 20% of global CO2 emissions. Looking at countries like Turkey, which has amazing, not an EU country, but has amazing good progress in this. Why? Because they're a manufacturing country. And looking at the companies like Siemens in Germany, Bosch, they have done immensely big progress because they have implemented digital technologies into their manufacturing sector and been able to be much, much greener. Also, we can learn a lot. A lot of the data centers that the technology centers are building are some of the world's most efficient technologies, controlling heat, recycling heat, etc. So how can we basically now, as governments and as private sector, make sure that we invest in the greening of the economy and putting digital technologies into all new buildings? If we look at buildings, for example, we can bring down CO2 emissions and we can bring down energy consumption by using digital twins and IoT to the half. Who would not like to spend half of what we spend on buildings today, knowing that 40% of the CO2 emissions in EU comes from buildings? Buildings is one of the biggest polluters together with agriculture. Okay, let's look at the next slide. What we developed is 8 ideas for accelerating Europe's twin transition, so the green and the digital transition. And let me just mention a few here. If you are interested in this subject, I recommend you that you go and Google this and write Digital Europe, digital action is climate action, and you will find all our publications, both on green and security. So first of all, strengthen the link between digital and green policies, making sure that each time we do a regulation, we think green, we think digital. Create action plans per industry. So what type of technologies do we need to invest in? Last but not least, data. I mean, as soon as we have the data, for example, for energy consumption, we can analyze them. As soon as we have the data from the agriculture, we can start analyzing. Do we actually need to water, or do we need use too much food for the animals? Can we do it differently? How can we optimize? Collecting of data. Let me get back to how we can do that. There's the Data Act at the moment, but of course the devil is in the detail, and we need to make sure that it's voluntary data sharing within the industries and between the industries. Let's jump to the next slide. Well, data economy. So Vestager and Breton has been 2 of the people driving this, and they want a fair and solid data economy. I sometimes can get a little bit scared that the data economy is a little bit driven by the fear of, the big techs. I don't think this is how it should be. We should think about what do we need data for, and how do we become more competitive? Also, we have to remember that companies' data are companies' data, not compared to the individual. Of course, the individual should have access to that data, but the innovations done on data is a competitive edge. And of course, we cannot have business-to-business mandatory data sharing. Just imagine if you're a company, you are innovating a great solution for green tech or health, and then all of a sudden you need to share everything with somebody else. But of course, we need to look at when it's necessary, for example, in emergency, how can we share data with public sector, but only in emergencies? And how can we innovate more and kind of create incentive for companies to share more data with each other and to innovate much more based on data? Only 12% of our companies in Europe are actually using big data in their services and products, which is quite worrying. Anybody can really boost their competitiveness by the use of data, small or big. Let's look at the next slide, please. So right now, we have tried to set a target. We said, okay, by 2025, the data economy should be 6%. I would say there is still a way to go, and that we want 50% of our SMEs using data analysis for their services and products. Again, still a long way to go, but let's see. I mean, the awareness, I think it starts with the awareness. Talking about data, teaching the younger generations how to analyze data, innovate through data, and then the data sharing and the data innovation will come. But so if we have the government in the room, and of course also the industry leaders, think about how you can, teach the younger generations and your employees data analysis, AI coding, all these things that seem so difficult, but honestly is not more difficult than learning any other language. It is an opportunity missed if we do not compete and use data. Let us look at the next slide. Then we have the AI, of course, the AI Act. Very hot, maybe and predictably going through the council for adoption, either in the next 6 to 12 months. However, let's look at this. Do we need to regulate AI? That's the first question. Are the SMEs ready to basically comply, and do they understand what it means? Do we have standards ready? And what is high risk? Some of these questions are very valuable. Many of our SMEs are struggling to implement GDPR. And yet, I mean, they have not finished yet. It's difficult. They can't get access to data. I can tell you that a few of the winners of the Digital Europe Unicorn, they are AI companies, but they're running on US data because they can't get their hands of data due to GDPR and other things. So how do we make sure that we get a regulation here that really is helping companies and helping us to become more competitive? And of course, also putting a stop to the risk. First of all, it's about defining high risk as high risk and only high risk as high risk, and not just across the board saying, okay, everything is high risk and everything needs to be very detailed controlled. Second of all, what Digital Europe has just done is that we are launching a sandbox for AI regulation, taking 10 scale-ups in Europe, taking them through the AI, looking at, can they comply? What will be the benefits? What will be the barriers? What will it cost them to implement? How will they handle it? What does it do to their market strategy? Will they stay in Europe? Will they go? And we are aiming in April to be able to share all these results and in a very dynamic process with governments and with a council, parliament, and of course the commission. Because we believe if we need more regulation, we need to make sure that we test it before. No company would ever put a product on market without testing it, nor should policymakers. Policies should also be for the companies and for benefiting our competitiveness. So this is what we're going to try to add to the process, making sure that smaller companies are heard on how to implement these things. Let's jump to the next slide. Okay, so big picture here. Europe is far behind. And of course, the AI Act, the idea is from the policymakers that if we regulate, then people feel more safe using AI. Therefore, there will be more uptake of AI. As a business person, I would say there is a cost benefit to do and a return on investment. So when exactly do we get that much, and how much burden can the single company actually take after COVID, after having to pay their energy bills, etc.? So we need to be extremely careful that we are not implementing without knowing the consequence for the smaller companies, because Europe lags far behind due to two reasons. Again, lack of competences. We are not educating the right people with the right skills. Two, we have fragmentation. So it's very difficult to get your hands on data. And we have GDPR, which is very tough for many smaller companies to comply with. A very good regulation, but the implementation lagged behind and was not taken as serious enough on the impact that it had. Let me look at the last slide and then end on saying it's all about values. It's all about regulating tech to make sure that we stay an inclusive, safe, fair in society. But nobody can keep their values without creating value, that is financial value. If we don't have the scalable companies to compete, if we don't create the technologies of the future in Europe, if we don't have the scalability from Greece to Germany, from Greece to Sweden to Denmark, from Denmark to Greece and vice versa, and make it very easy for the companies to grow, then it's going to be very hard long-term to preserve our values. So with that, I would say, let's find a European balanced way between regulation and market agility. That is exactly what we need to preserve our values. Thank you so much for listening.